In this pod, we'll look at how globalization affects business.
Globalisation is a concept that surrounds us every day. If you look at the label in your t-shirt and it tells you it was made halfway around the world, or you've recently shopped at McDonald's, or you know someone who works in Asda, then you're part of a global market. Businesses that are globalised might buy or sell from abroad, make their products in a different country to where they're sold, or even have a service, such as a call centre, located in another country.
This has increased because of the rise in e-commerce, meaning buying and selling online. But it's been around much longer than that. There has been trading between countries for as long as business has existed. One of the reasons so many businesses operate globally is because it creates so many opportunities.
Think of a clothes retailer, someone like ASOS. Many of their products are produced in Asia, where labour and materials are cheaper. Because they operate online, it's easy for them to sell in the UK or Europe or further afield. This increases the possibility of more sales because they enter new markets, meaning new countries. But it also spreads risk. Imagine if there was a big economic crisis in the UK and people's incomes fell. This means people would buy fewer products. But if a business like ASOS sells in hundreds of countries, then they only have limited risk if one country's sales fall.
It's not all positive though. A business must be well adapted for globalization. For example, they can't use an English website to sell in France. So if they sell in hundreds of countries, they then need to redesign their website for each language and adapt their pricing to every currency. Think about when you buy crisps when you're on holiday. Lay's Crisps is a global brand, but is known in the UK by the brand name Walkers. They're all but the same crisps, but they're labelled differently for the market and often have different flavours. So selling to other countries often involves a lot of considerations. Just because something is popular in the UK doesn't mean it will be popular globally.
Another consideration is supply chains. Managing a supply chain that buys from Asia, sends to a UK centre for checking, and then delivers around the UK is a lot to manage. But what if the business is trying to send products or materials to hundreds of other countries too? This becomes a major challenge.
Then there are local laws and taxes. ASOS states that in 2019, over 60% of their sales came internationally, worth over £1.5 billion. So they have a huge global base, but in every country they sell into, they have to understand the laws and pay the relevant taxes. In order to understand these different laws and taxes, they'll likely need to employ local experts, further driving up costs.
So, globalisation can come at a cost to businesses, but that isn't the only problem. When ASOS started selling in the USA, they were competing with a lot of the local companies, potentially driving US companies out of business. Local governments might get protective and put restrictions in place. For example, through a tariff which adds a cost to the product, meaning goods from ASOS now appear more expensive. Or they could subsidise their own businesses, which is when a government gives local businesses money to allow them to reduce their prices and try and drive away large multinational companies now the local goods are cheaper.
They could also use quotas, which don't add any costs but simply limit the number or products that are allowed to be sold by foreign businesses like ASOS. When ASOS sells within the European Union, they don't have any of these problems, as all countries within the European Union agree between themselves that they won't do any of these things to stop competition.
You need to be able to discuss examples of how globalisation could affect the marketing mix. Remember, this is product, place, price, and promotion. We'll use ASOS again to give an example of each. The product itself would have to adapt globally. ASOS will probably be more successful if they adapt their designs and styles to local fashions. But this would make it more difficult to produce all these styles.
Place would be more difficult. Even though ASOS primarily sells online, they still need to think about how they move their goods, as they now need to organise transport between hundreds of countries. Promotion would be affected too. Even with a simple advert, they need to be mindful of local customs and cultures. Advertising that features women in bikinis by a pool wouldn't be culturally sensitive in many Middle Eastern countries, for example.
Finally, price. As we've mentioned, prices would be affected by currency and exchange rates, as well as local taxes, but also by local norms. The average amount we spend on clothes in the UK is very different to some other countries. So, ASOS would need to adapt prices based on the wealth and income of international customers.